asset condition data enough to build a strategic asset management plan? Spoiler, it's not. I'm Dan Hounsel, Senior Editor for the Facilities Market with Trade Press Media Group. Thank you to our sponsor today, Brightly Software. Before we begin, let's cover a few quick housekeeping details. We encourage audience questions throughout the webcast. To submit your questions, navigate to the Q&A Ask Questions module at the bottom of the screen and type in your questions at any time. To earn 0.1 CEUs, you must watch 40 minutes or more of this event. You can download your certificate at the completion of the webcast from the Earn Certification module. There's also a related content module on your screen. This area has more information and links that you can explore. Today's event will be archived at facilitiesnet.com/webcasts. Our learning objectives today include these. Explore case studies and real-life examples that showcase the way organizations are collecting and leveraging the data needed for strategic asset management. Understand how a strategic asset management plan enables you to optimize the way you're treating assets and better plan budget and capital works projects. Learn how an effective strategic asset management plan can help you make informed strategic decisions, and capital plans. With that, I will pass it over to Luke Anderson, who is Strategic Solution Consultant with Brightly Software. Luke, the microphone is yours.
Thanks, everybody. And I will come on video for a moment to say hello. I'm having some bandwidth issues, so I'm losing connection and losing audio if I use video too long, so I will do the moderation off of video today, unfortunately. But it's great to meet everybody. I'm here in snowy, icy Raleigh, North Carolina, where parts of our area received over a foot of snow last weekend, which has subsequently shut down all schools, all local government, has completely ground our entire county to a halt. So we are all snowed in with about a half an inch of snow left on the ground. But looking forward to today. We've got some great folks that we're going to speak with. I'm going to do some very brief introductions, and then we're going to cover just a little level setting. And then we've got some great questions and some great stories that we're going to go through for our time. When we did the practice run of this, we probably went close to 2 hours. So I don't think we're going to have any lack of content for you guys today. We've got some great things that we'll go through. There is a Q&A on the side. Please submit those questions in there as we're going. I'll try to grab those live. If the speaker is speaking, you have a question for a speaker, but we'll definitely make sure to go through it at the end. So the three folks we've got today, Alex, Scott, and Ron. Alex's background really right now is the director of Waco Independent School District, the director of facilities and maintenance management, focusing again in that kind of educational environment. Scott, on the other hand, though still a public service expert, is on the local government side. He is the DPW director for Fountain Valley, California. And then Ron comes with extensive experience running the DPW for the Navy for a couple of decades. So he's now with one of our partners in Alpha Facility Solutions, but he brings a lot of great stories and a lot of great experience. So we definitely welcome everybody to the call. I'd like to start by just level setting a basic concept. When we start to talk about things like condition of our assets and asset data and work orders, we're going to go through a lot of questions around things like aging workforce and transition of leadership. But I wanted to bring this up because I just want to draw a linkage between the idea of an asset register, right? The database that tells us what do we own, what condition is it in. That has a relationship to the work order system. The work orders, whatever work order system you're using, the work orders you're doing on the assets within your register. So at a very high level, when we think about the condition of an asset, right, the work order history should and does have an impact on that condition. When we understand the condition of an asset, now we can start to do long-term planning. And that's really the topic of our conversation today. The little internal debate we're going to have is that enough data? Is knowing the condition of my asset enough to take me to this ability to do condition asset management? We're going to use the term facility condition assessment quite often. FCA, condition evaluation, boots on the ground. There's a lot of different ways of kind of referring to it. I wanted to pull this up just so everybody could understand what we're referring to. I would imagine most of you on this call have either done or are familiar with a facility condition assessment. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time. But in general, it is a process of putting boots on the ground, walking through a building or a structure, capturing the main assets within these 12 areas, identifying age, condition, replacement life cycle, replacement value, and more. And that's part of what we'll kind of discuss today. So I want to jump right in with my first question. Let me go back to our list of esteemed panelists here. Uh-oh, too far. There we go. And I want to start, I'm going to open this one up to all three of you guys. I think I kind of want to get everybody's opinion on this very first one. So let's just start with Alex, if you don't mind. And I want you to think about, the data that you have now with any assessments or data that you've had in the past. How is having that information built credibility? How has it changed your relationship with people like finance, elected officials, leadership? And then as a follow-up, is there any area that data alone falls short on with kind of building some of that trust with your direct leadership? And we're having audio issues with Alex. Fantastic. So let's go on to Scott. Perfect.
So the question was, where does the data fall short? How does it build the confidence, correct?
Yeah, I would say, how does having it help build confidence? But then typically we know it's not everything. So where does just data by itself fall short? Great.
Well, data by itself is just a snapshot in time, and it's only as good as, how recent it is. And so if you're not keeping it up, like we recently had a facility condition assessment report done, which is great because that creates a baseline and gives us something to build off of. But essentially, if you don't touch it, it's out of date within a week of finishing it. So unless you're using something to keep it updated, most of the time that static report really doesn't help the staff to be able to long-term plan out things. And where does it fall short? It doesn't, in our organization, the organizations I've worked for. So I'm on the West Coast, Southern California, for all the different public sector jobs that I've had. And so we're going to deal with it a little bit different. Fortunately, we don't have the same type of cold that you have and the issues that go with the snow and everything. But it's it really is something that in the public sector, we have limited funds, very limited funds. And so as a result, there is a constant competition. And if you can't show that you're applying those funds to really the greatest need, and if you don't have the data to support that, hey, we looked at everything and that's current, then you can lose some of that support and as well as the confidence from the elected officials and the city manager, in our case, a city manager. So with that, I'll stop talking. I'll let go over to Ron and back to Alex, because I'm sure they have plenty to contribute.
Yeah, Luke.
Ron, what are your thoughts there? Yeah, please.
Well,
sorry.
I represent a facility asset management company, so we think about this kind of stuff all the time. And as I think about asset management, my mind goes to definitions that I've come across over the years. I spent 4 years with Alpha, 9 years with a large school district as director of facilities before Alpha. But I've come across a couple of definitions of asset management that I think help make the case that the data is the basis for that credibility with the other parties that you work with. And so let me explain. A guy named DJ Vanier, a Canadian fellow, early 2000s, he wrote an article called Why Industry Needs Asset Management Tools. Why Industry Needs Asset Management Tools. And he defined asset management as the answering of 6 what questions that you ask yourself, not just one, but you ask again through your work you ask over and over. And the questions are, what assets do we own? So that's the first. What's the value of our assets? What's the condition of our assets? What maintenance has been deferred? What items are already in backlog, need maintenance right away? The fifth one, what's the service life and replacement costs at the end of the service life? So it's all about life cycle and replacement costs. And then with all that information, what should we replace first? So I like how he put the emphasis on gathering the data, right? So asking yourself these what questions, gathering this data, and that's a baseline. But then there's another definition that I came across that really puts another spin on it that's really helpful. A guy named Wayne Eddy, an Australian guy, created a municipal knowledge base. And he said asset management is the combination of management, like facilities management, financial, economic, engineering, and other practices. So there's this team of individuals of different departments, if you will, applied to the physical assets, we would say the built environment. So this team works together on the built environment with the objective of providing a level of service at the most cost-effective price. And the whole life cycle is involved. The whole facility life cycle is in view. All right, so you have these two different definitions that I think fit together really well, because in one case, it's about the data, right? It's answering these what questions. That gives you the data set. And then you take that data and you leverage that in strategic partnerships, if you will, strategic relationships with finance and procurement, maybe even your maintainers, with HR. The data becomes the basis for your credibility because you use that data you've gathered. And we got to think about how to keep that data current too, as Scott mentioned, because, if you don't keep the data current, then your arguments are dead after, a month or a year or whatever. But I mean, so long answer, but I just like the way that those two definitions kind of fit together to make the case that you got to have the data, but then you use the data to establish your credibility with these other departments to get what you want, with finance, with procurement, with engineering, et cetera. Hope that makes sense.
Makes a ton of sense. And I love that concept that it's kind of a direct answer. It's, data gives us the foundation. It's the framing for the house. You can't have the credibility without data, but data alone, the frame alone is not a home, right? There's got to be a way to use it and understand it in order to add context. So, Alex, I think you were able to get connected again. Are you able to hear us?
I think so. Can you all hear me?
Gotcha.
We sure can.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good. Sorry about that. But, in our case here at the district, we met some challenges, the year after COVID. In our case was, one of our buildings burned down, and we had to go through the whole motions of filing a claim, going into those discussions with our insurance company. And the one thing that we really had was we had a robust, set of information, basically of our buildings, and specifically for the one that burned down. So when we were going into the whole, claim situation, going back and forth as far as, what should we get compensated for, what don't. So we did present basically a quote or a proposal for an estimate, for the actual replacement of that building. So what that really helped us with as a district was we went from a $14 million offer from the insurance company into a almost $23 million payoff for that. The reason for that was because we had basically all our information in place. So whenever the company that came out to do the estimate of the loss, we had also an estimate prepared in-house based on the data that we had because of the FCA that we had just recently in 2019 put together. So when they saw the actual information and all the data that we were providing, it gave us that credibility to basically get that increase in the payoff for that. The other thing is that we have used it to basically request additional staffing based on the data that we have and what is the plan, long-range plan of how we're going to use those assets. And we have proven that that has been a benefit not only for our department, but also for the district. Following up with that data and condition assessment that we had of how we needed to maintain those assets throughout the following years and the amount of personnel, staff that we needed to successfully put that in place. Also adding the extended life cycle of equipment as well, just because of the years that they were installed. So we were tracking all of the actual work that we were performing and how that was taking a positive effect on the outcome of that equipment. Also requesting funding. So having, and we do struggle. I think it's a struggle to just maintain it. Really, I think that's a struggle for every organization that has an FCA, especially doing it in-house. So that's why you have to basically go out and create those partnerships with outside vendors that can basically give you that that option, and that provide you with those services really that sometimes in-house is really difficult to do. I think the biggest thing that it has given us, as far as it's is buy-in from our admin and our leadership staff. As far as when we go out to request something, we don't only are good at the selling point, but we also show that it is a long there's longevity as far as that we're executing what we're promising.
I think you use it to make the argument with your procurement. Say, I know I need roofs over the next 5 years. Well, maybe I need an indefinite delivery IDIQ contract for roofing, right? Because I could bid 6 times over and not get the best price, or I could have an IDIQ and I could get some strategic sourced competitive pricing, right? That's the name of the game, is providing these services most cost effectively. So you leverage the data with procurement. As Alex said, you leverage the data with your finance team. I know what I need. I got a list of projects ready to go. You got extra funding somebody else couldn't spend. I can spend it. I'm ready to go because I've got a prioritized list.
Yeah, and I think providing that condition of where we are, falls into what you just said. Where are we today? Based on the data that we have, and like Scott said, data is just data if you don't really use it or utilize it in a way that you're really informing, your, in this case, our district, what is the real condition of our buildings and our, building portfolio moving forward. So I think just having those open conversations with the right information at hand really just simplifies those conversations of where we are and where we need to get.
Well, one of the added benefits too, as Alec, you're talking about the answers, we're dealing with a lot of different, some are dealing with districts or elected officials, they have a preference of their local areas. And so if you can have the whole picture there, and you can show, hey, we're not showing favoritism of one given location, but really this is the highest priority or the highest need, it helps the credibility in that regard too.
And you can show if you have a standard level of service that you're applying across your whole municipality. Here's what I'm trying to do. I've got to meet the need over here. It's greater than over here because it's the same level of service. You told me what level of service you wanted, leadership. Now I'm trying to deliver it. So here's what it's going to take. And I've got the data to prove it. I think that's power.
And how the decision is going to affect, the upcoming years. Whatever work you don't do or you don't replace this year is just going to add up to next year, and that's going to basically increase cost. So, you have a snapshot of basically what probably got the next 4 or 5 years, more or less, that you could actually give accurate data as far as, here's where we are, here's how much it's going to cost us in the near future.
Right, which allows you to have those funding questions so that maybe if you didn't hit those key areas for certain electeds, that you can show, hey, in year 2 or year 3, we're going to be there. And you can start the dialogue early to at least plant the seed about getting funding approved for future years.
That's great. Yeah, that's a pretty powerful story, Alex, of that data justifying what $8 million more in the insurance buyout. That's pretty incredible. And you guys alluded to it in the back and forth there, and it's a perfect kind of segue because, the probably a great example is that insurance group, or speaking to council about the projects, or the indefinite contract for roofing. The data that you have is only valuable if people buy into it, if they trust it, right? You could have a whole bunch of data, and if the insurance company looked at that, Alex, and said, this is a bunch of garbage, there's no way this is true, that number wouldn't have or couldn't have changed. So if you can, let's, anybody that wants to jump in, I think we're all speaking freely here. So let's talk about some of the inconsistencies. Maybe maybe new leadership coming in. Scott, I know that's one thing we talked about. A lot of people turn over every 2 to 4 years. How do you overcome those inconsistencies? How do you educate people as to the data that you have and why it should be trusted?
Well, most of the people on this call, and certainly us on the panel, we're technical people, right? So there's a lot less emotion. It's like, what does the data show? That's what we're going to do. We're not making these decisions based upon our feelings. We're looking at a given situation, saying what needs the current or the highest attention. However, the electeds are and the appointed people are not necessarily in the same position, nor do they look at things the same way. So I'm very fortunate right now. I have a group of electeds that support facility maintenance. We were in a position where we had some buildings that were really neglected, and the city council wanted to know, well, where are we standing throughout the city? So we went through the process, FCA, we got the software, we're really kicking off. I'd love to say we're deep into it, but we're at the beginning stages. But I have worked with Brightly before and another agency, and so it's very promising. But as you're saying, Luke, is this council is going to change every 2 to 4 years. They're changing. So what we can do with the data, at least what you can do when you do have that support, and even when you don't, you can make a strong argument, but when you do have the support, most of us are doing a multi-year capital improvement plan, right? We're not talking about 1 year at a time. There is a 5-10 year, and we're scheduling this out. And certainly if you're talking about, hey, when's the next time we're going to do a roof, that's way out there. But to get it on the books and to be able to have those conversations early, helps set a little bit of the tone with the electeds when those competing projects come up for general fund monies. They at least will take it in consideration. It may get pushed a year or two, and we got to be flexible, but at least it says, hey, the longer we push it, the bigger the backlog, the harder it's going to be to address it, especially if you start to build in escalation, right? It's because you have a cost to supply it at some point in time, and if you don't consider escalation, then you can really find yourself in a bad spot.
I think when you do a condition assessment and an asset inventory, you got to recognize, or I think it's helpful to recognize, especially in your dialogue with leadership, that you've got some static data, the data that's never going to change, make, model, serial number, data installed, so static data, and you've got some dynamic data, condition information. Of course, the life cycle is not going to change, but the condition is going to change because it's not static, it's dynamic. And it can help to have this dialogue with the leadership and say, think about condition data. It's affected by the original engineering. Was it designed properly as a piece of equipment? Was it installed properly to begin with? What about the use patterns? Are we using it in the same pattern of use as we intended to when we installed it? Maybe we've doubled the use just by use patterns. What about weather exposure? Is it being used in an environment that it was intended to be used in? And then maintenance. Is the maintenance being done like it's supposed to be done? Is that consistent? And so you have all these different variables that can affect the condition. And so it makes sense that you would have to revisit at least occasionally and update your conditions and zero in on the conditions and make sure that you've got a good forecast going 3 to 5 years out. And that can help a little bit in the dialogue with the leadership when they're like, well, I thought we did this already. Why do we have to go look again? And the reality is that data set has to live on, and we have to keep updating it and keep it current so that it's going to feed us good information so we remain credible. I think that can be helpful.
Yeah, and just another idea on that too. I'm sorry, Alex. Well, I'll be quick. Another idea on that is the facility condition index too. When we're talking about, hey, long-term and electeds change, if you're in an organization long enough or somebody's been doing the proper documentation, you can see that, hey, while we were prescribing money, we were in the green or in the yellow. But as we've been deferring things, we're obviously sliding more to the yellow and the red. With electeds, it's my opinion that big chubby crayon or just as simple as possible is the best thing to do. And colors, as we can create the pictographs or the infographics, so to speak, from the data is super helpful at a high level. And then those that are technical enough, you can dive into it. But some of them, if you try to, you just overwhelm them.
Yeah, in our case is, the FCA, it's a living document. It's going to continue to evolve throughout the years. And what I've seen with my experience here is that, there's a lot of elements that go into play of how that's really going to be used. For instance, you might have facility condition assessments that go strictly by, manufacturers' recommendation of life cycle. They could tell you it's going to last 15 years, and you got the lemon out of the bunch, and the equipment lasted 9. And then you have the other, side of it where We have equipment that was, life cycle expectancy was 15 years and we took it to 25. There's a lot of factors that come into, making your data. And that's why, whenever we talk about data, facility condition assessment is just like Scott said, it's black and white. There's no feelings attached to it. It's what it is. But I think that there's a lot of other external things going on that affect that assessment. For instance, are you really, applying good preventative maintenance to your systems? Are you extending the life cycle, the recommended life cycle of that equipment? How is that really working out? Are you documenting it? Are you collecting the data that's basically going to be in that conversation of, hey, and I know that Scott is probably going to laugh, but that we end up asking for $10 million and you're like, well, here's 3 and make it work. So, so, once you have that and you fall into that sort of, dynamics of asking for funding, which, you don't get not every time what you're asking for, that additional element comes into play as far as, okay, which are really the worst of the worst. And that's when staff comes in, you look at the work order systems, which systems have worked more than others. So data is a living, that FCI is going to be a living document. It's going to be feeding from so many sources. And I think that's what you can control most of the time in-house as far as, what are those conversations looking like? Are you having those honest conversations with your staff? Are you really looking into those other data points that are affecting the outcome of that, 5-year planning, a long-range planning that you have of replacements? If that makes sense or not.
Did to me.
And I think.
Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to add, and as a condition assessment, we're trying to apply the factors that speak to those variables. So we're in the field, we're putting our eyeballs and our hands on equipment to try to assess its condition. We're interacting with the maintenance staff about, okay, the age of the equipment and the maintenance on the equipment and the reliability of the equipment. And so you're trying to blend together several factors to come up with an objective score, if you will, of the condition. And so you try to apply a standard methodology, and it doesn't have to be us, it's anybody who's doing a condition assessment. What you want to do is you want to apply these entering arguments of age and condition and reliability and maintenance to blend together a good condition score that you then update periodically, so you've got a good forecast going forward.
So there's a couple questions by Aaron Thomas in the Q&A. I don't know if we want to answer number 4 now. I think, Ron, you might be able to speak to that pretty well.
Let me see if I can catch up with you, Scott.
Oh, man, I've been a little bit behind on that. I apologize.
No. What's the question?
It says
fundamentally.
Yeah, please.
Go ahead, Luke. Go ahead.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah, fundamentally, what should come first, asset condition data or the asset management plan?
I would say the asset management plan. I think, or the strategic vision behind the plan is going to drive what you're doing going forward. You have to have condition data to inform the execution of your budget, of your program. But you have to have the idea of a strategic asset management plan is to incorporate the vision of the leadership of your organization in helping inform where are we going as an organization? What are we doing moving forward? What's important to us as a district, as a municipality, as a higher ed institution, whatever. And so you're trying to apply that strategic vision to your tactics every day in, day out. All right. And so if you have that vision from your leadership, then you apply that vision to what you see before you as the condition of your assets. So I'm going to apply that vision and I'm going to make decisions based on the level of service we've agreed on. What level of service do you want me to achieve? Is this, and by that I mean, are we Disney World? Are we a hospital? Is that the level of service and the level of maintenance that we can afford, or well, no, maybe it's a nice public library or a nice grocery store. We have to set our expectations of what we can afford as an institution in terms of level of service going forward. And when you have that lined out, now you're going to apply that to your needs in front of you and the budget that can be afforded, and you execute that plan. I hope that makes sense. You kind of have to have both.
It does. I would like to add on though, because sometimes, and not add on so much to your technical answer, because you're much more knowledgeable than me, but from the procurement side. So sometimes one of the delays for public sector is, oh man, we got to go through this long process to be able to procure. And so what I wanted to add is that we were able to get through it and get through it a very cost-effective way and a timely way by using Sourcewell, actually using Brightly, and then Brightly had a line item in their through Sourcewell where we were able to get, we actually got alpha out and did a facility condition assessment. And so that really streamlined it and it was helpful. So it's not such a daunting task when you have to say, oh, I got to come up with all this RFP, RFQ, have staff draw it up. You can actually have a quicker way of getting there.
Yeah, I would agree with Ron. In our case, before we actually went with the FCA, because we had to basically ask for the funding for it. We didn't have our in-house funding for it. We went to the CFO and we basically told her, hey, I have 50 cents, but I need 500. Could you, fix me up with the rest? But before we even had those conversations with them, we basically detailed a plan of what benefits would it bring. And detailing, okay, here's the expectation. And when we wanted to set up that expectation, we wanted to set up one that would push us, would challenge us, but at the same time was one that we really could sustain with the staffing that we had. So once we detailed that plan and we, basically show the roadmap of how that was going to look in the future, the buy-in for, securing the funding for moving forward with the FCA was done. Then really came the difficult part, not, getting it done, but sustaining it afterwards. And I think, sticking to the plan and making sure that you provide that information to leadership so they can make the decision of pulling the trigger on an FCA, because sometimes they don't really, it's not that they don't see the value of it, they see it as an expense, but I think just having that plan up front of how that is going to look and how that, incorporating that FCA is going to be a benefit for your institution, I think that's the best way to really move forward.
There's another question from Aaron, and then Brian has added one, but the next one is, I can speak to it if we're talking public right away, how we do it, but I think that if I'm understanding the gist of it, he's talking about being able to track assets, and in this case, he's talking about a PVC water line and tracking the degradation of it. And so, Ron or Alex, Ron particularly, I think you and I have had conversations about this a little bit, but I think it'd be similar to like water lines and walls if you're talking a facility, or electrical lines and walls, right? Yeah, if you're talking at the panels, it's one thing, but how do you track the degradation of those things that are hidden that you can't see?
To a large degree, you have to do that based on life cycle alone, to some degree. Branch wiring, like you mentioned, would be a good example, or water line, things that you can't physically inspect, but you can take some cues from how those systems are behaving. So if you're having frequent plumbing backups, right, your system that you can't see, you could camera scope it, of course. Plumbing, you could put a camera scope down a plumbing line and see what's going on. But branch wiring, if you're having a lot of shorts, you could do some voltage drop testing. There's some things that you could do to try to assess the performance of a hidden asset. But in a lot of cases, you have to at least start with the life cycle of that hidden asset and say, BOMA, Building Owners and Managers Association, they publish standard life cycles that are a starting point. And so you can use that BOMA life cycle as a starting point, as a kind of a realistic expectation for the most conservative life cycle that you could expect, and then try to take some cues from the performance of the assets.
Yeah, and from the public infrastructure side, in a public right-of-way, essentially, it's different funding mechanisms, right? Most of the time, the facilities and things that are on the private side, when I say private, it's publicly owned, but not necessarily within the public right-of-way, where you have funding mechanisms like an enterprise fund, meaning you're charging water utility bills or sewer bills. But when you are charging a water bill or sewer bill, then you have the ability to have a master plan, and that master plan is updated regularly, maybe every 5 years or so, and you're going out and you're inspecting your infrastructure and using the best testing methods available and updating the cost for the replacement. And that's how you figure your fees, how much you're charging for operations and replacements and everything. So that's the short answer without getting into all of that, but a little different, obviously, if you're talking about, hey, I got a water main on a campus, right? I got a huge campus and it's running across. That's not necessarily has the same type of funding source. Sorry, Luke, I don't mean to be doing your job, but it looks like Brian.
I love it. Keep it going. Yeah.
Have you had success in capitalizing this FCA effort expenses, or did this hit operational? In our case, it was general fund, so it's operational. It wasn't a means of capitalizing it unless we find some sort of arena where we can get some outside grant funding to address the particular infrastructure. That would be from my perspective.
Yeah, for us was the same, Scott. It was came out from the general fund. It wasn't really, there was not a funding source out there that we could use outside of our own funding.
I think in some cases, I'm aware of some K-12 districts that have sales tax programs, especially in the Southeast. I'm aware of some of them, and sometimes they're able to capitalize the expenses associated with condition assessment, and then even managing the work going forward, using the sales tax as, to fund the work associated with the ultimate work that you're doing in the facilities. But I suppose that's cat to cat can, depending on the rules and the district you're working in.
Yeah, it really does to a certain degree, as much as we're technical people and we most of us, at least on the public side, it seems like we're putting our hat on and rolling our sleeves up and getting the work done. But we have to be advocates and we have to be salespeople. We have to believe in the data ourselves. We got to understand where it came from, and then sit down and really tell the story and use all the tools that are available, whether it be through the graphs that they have that make it simple, or whatever it is, to really explain the situation. And then when everything's said and done, not be offended if they say no. But we got to do our best to ask for the money, be compelling. And these tools, they allow you, having the facility condition assessment, having a asset management program, showing the facility condition index. Those are all great tools to make the argument, to plead the case. And you have to buy in. You have to really, you have to be the advocate, is what it comes down to. Somebody's going to do it. And you're competing against other departments, as bad as it may sound, but it's the truth. You're competing against other departments like fire or safety, relay, police, whatever it is, that typically are going to get the nod more often than not. And so you got to find a way to be compelling and show that, hey, if we don't do this, well, then this is the potential impacts and the costs. We may not have to do it this year, but you can't defer this 5-10 years and expect for things to be okay. And an emergency repair or a reactive, right, maintenance where something's broken, you're going out there, is going to be a lot more expensive than doing the preventative or doing it ahead of time, scheduled.
In our case was, I think one thing that really helped this year, leadership. We have a new superintendent, she's really a person that really motivates people and really is really inclusive when it comes to planning. And this year we were included in, what's the vision and the mission of the district? What is the goals that we have as a school district? Is to guarantee, the education of our students. They're their priority. Then we have staff. and all those things that come into play that sometimes you're not really seeing the larger picture because sometimes you're not included in that conversation just because you're maintenance and and it's not, they don't really, some leadership really don't see the fit. They're just like, hey, keep things running and just you'll be fine. In this case, she wanted to share what that vision looked like. And once we had a better understanding of what was the result that she was looking for, we tend to understand where we fit in, right? And then once you start understanding where you fit into that master plan, as an institution, and in our case, as a school district, you start learning, okay, now I know where really my priority should be. And you start addressing those and you start incorporating that into the conversations that you have when you're asking for funding, saying, hey, we're following the vision, we're following the mission of what the school district is trying to accomplish. And here is, our contribution to that, to promoting students, to making, their learning environment, one that they can enjoy, that the facilities are up and running, that, let's say, the outside of the building looks nice. In our case, we're also over custodial. You have probably 80% of the parents don't go to the campus. They don't enter the campus. They're always looking on the outside. What are the things that they're looking at? What are the priorities to really enhance that learning experience, as well as the staff. They spend more time there than they're actually at their house. So I'm married to a teacher, so I know, the whole, you're on vacation, but then they want to go back to the school. They're wanting to get out, but then they want to go back. So, you want to know as a department how you fit into that. So I think knowing that really helps that conversation of having that, those nice, conversations of how can you help.
That's great.
Hey, Ron, Patricia has a question in there that I think you might be able to answer real well. I don't know if you had a chance
Exactly
to read
what I
it.
was thinking, Scott. Yep, that's exactly what I was thinking.
Number 7, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
In the past, estimated life expectancy for commercial building systems and components was built to last. How have these life cycles with new equipment changed? That's a tough one.
I got an anecdote here I'll share, Ron, while you think about that for a moment. I know it's on the fly, but I was working with a client out in Texas, and they were showing me their stormwater infrastructure. And he told me a story that one of their lift stations for one of the neighborhoods, a fairly affluent neighborhood, was on the side of a hill. And at the bottom of that hill was the stormwater pump. And it was 2 1906 Rolls-Royce airplane turbines that they were using to pump that water. So they had them, that at this point, 118 years on that life cycle. And he was laughing because he says the biggest challenge we're going to have is not replacing these things. It's convincing everybody that the new ones we put in are not going to last 120 years.
Yeah, I think newer systems is not that, well, older systems, of course, when you compare them, they lasted longer. I think new systems really are incorporating so much technology into it that right now you have so many points that are sensitive to certain conditions, like HVAC, like, electrical, lighting, that it affects them more. So you could see a system that's not, it's not that it's not working, is that just the conditions that it has, it's built in to protect so much of the system that it starts shutting down. You see units that are tripping more than they used to, just because, they have made them sensitive so they could protect themselves from either power surge or, different weather conditions. That sometimes is tough, because you're seeing all these systems, newer systems that are just, tripping on freestats, and, and then you have your control system, which is not really working as it should, and, in relationship with that unit, and it's opening out an outside damper, and it's pulling cold air into the system, and the system is shutting down because, should not be pulling cool air from the outside, cold air. I think systems have become extremely more sensitive than they used to be, just because of the incorporation of so much technology into them. And I think equipment in the past was just simple. I mean, it was just, crank it on and it stayed on until it basically died. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
I don't disagree. I think you're right, Alex. I also think that the tipping point or the critical factor is your understanding of what you own and how to maintain it through its life cycle and whether or not you are maintaining it. I think that's going to be the more determining factor, is whether you have a plan to address the maintenance that equipment needs. I can't say anecdotally that I can think of a dramatic change in life cycles of anything in my memory and my recollection. I think Alex is right, and then it's probably tipping down a bit because of the sophistication of the equipment. But I think the bigger factor is just whether it's being managed and maintained, whether you're getting your eyeballs and your hands on it in the frequency that's recommended. I think that's the bigger factor.
Awesome. Well, great questions that are coming in. If we get more, we'll keep addressing. But I want to get to kind of the pinnacle of the chat here. Getting a little low on time, so I think we'll probably be the last question unless we get more from the audience. But I want to go with question number 4 on the list, guys. I think it's a really important one. We think about asset condition as the foundation. Everything we've talked about today has really been based around that idea that the condition data is that foundation. It's the start. But where does it stop being enough, right? What other information do you think is important in order to effectively do the prioritization and decision-making outside of just the condition?
I'll start it. I think factors associated with risk are very important. By that, and by risk, I'm referring to, 2 sides of a matrix: likelihood or probability of failure. So how old is a piece of equipment getting? How likely is its failure? And then the other matrix is consequence or criticality. So how important is that asset or is that facility to you, to your institution? And that starts with the mission, vision, and what's been laid out in the strategic asset management plan. So you've got to apply likelihood of failure based on age and criticality, mission dependency, consequence, to help you prioritize. So you're going to take your condition information and then you're going to apply how important are these assets to us or these facilities. Is this the headquarters? Is this, just an ancillary support facility? Is this a storage building somewhere? And so, and then you could also apply system priorities. Like, for instance, HVAC, roofing, life safety equipment is almost always very important to an institution. So you start to bring in other factors that are essentially replicate what's going on in your head. What's going on in your head is, well, I understand the condition, but that's not a very important facility. This other one is more important. Or that's just, that's flooring, which to some people is more important, but gee, HVAC is really super important, and the roof, et cetera. So you're trying to replicate what's going on in your head in terms of prioritization. I think. What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Love that.
My response is going to be probably, just because I deal with a lot of electeds and the politics and community groups, the data is real clear. I mean, it can stop being sufficient when you start getting into the preferences, the feelings, the energy that a community may have. Example I've used before is you have a family, you have a budget, and you may need a new roof on the house, but if the wife and the kids are dying and have their heart set on going on a trip to Disneyland or something like that, you may need to defer that maintenance for a little bit and take care of the family and the well-being of the family. So that's part of it. Is, I'd say, just at least in my circle and those that I work alongside, you got to find out, well, what else is the goals of the community or the goals of the organization. So, and that's not going to be reflected within the asset management plan. And so once you know that, once again, don't get emotional. You're trying to do the best you can. And it's okay, we can do these other things, or we can defer this money somewhere else, but do the best you can to reset the expectations. Because all of us carry that burden on our back, and we know when it needs, or we believe we know when it needs to be done. And then somebody steps along and says, no, we're not doing it. And it makes no sense to us, but it's just, okay, let's recalibrate, but also still be persuasive and try to get the expectations reset. Because sometimes too, even though the community may want to go a certain direction, or the electeds may want to go certain directions, you may find some information that can compel them to maybe postpone that effort and finish up what you have right now. And a quick story for me was this. We're in the process of building a new fire station. And that could be an emotional decision. And it is an emotional decision for a lot of the community and the electeds. And at our last strategic planning session, there was this big support. So this is with the council and the public, and it's kind of an open conversation where we were just in more of a community center than in the formal settings. And we were receiving direction to move forward with this $30 million fire station. And my comment, with all respectfulness as I could have, I said, we can do this. So I stopped and I joined the conversation, raised my hand, stepped up, said, we can do this. We can absolutely do this. But please keep in mind that when we do this, we are deferring a lot of work, all that pavement work we're going to do, the facility maintenance work, because we're going to redirect all the funding to the fire station. And that is something that I support, right? I'm here to build whatever is the council decides upon. But please keep in mind that that's a significant amount of money. And with that and not having everything worked out, we're deferring millions and millions of dollars of pavement, millions and millions of dollars of facility work for the next 3 to 5 years. But I'd have to get back to you with the exact number. And so what that did is it allowed us to at least pump the brakes a little bit. So we're working on the funding so we don't have to have that hit to all of our budget. And we also had a bunch of money redirected into paving and roofing. So sometimes it'll work. Maybe the only time in my career it works, but sometimes it'll work.
Awesome.
Yeah, and in my case is it is the foundation. You have to have a baseline of where you're going to build, your plan. So that is, it is critical to have something, to build upon. The other thing is that, like Scott said, there are so many outside factors that you could have a detailed plan, and you could have the funding, assigned to it, and all of a sudden, priorities change, and you're like, okay, well, now we're not going to do that. We're going to shift here. In our case, is a little bit different than Scott, because Scott has so many different types of buildings, and and he deals with more of the city infrastructure. In our case, our priority is classrooms. So if I have to choose between a supporting building and a campus, well, a campus is going to be priority. So, that is defined, and that is not going to change. So that is the logic behind, whenever we're actually doing planning. Now, the other thing that affects, the outcome is, how can you sustain a short-range planning with a long-range planning? And I think that's really difficult sometimes to do, especially with public entities, just because of funding, like Scott said, politics coming in, are we going to get a bond passed? I came to Waco as I believe it's going to be 10 years now. The day that I got here, they told me, don't do a whole lot of things at one of the high schools because we're going to replace it. Well, fast forward 10 years later, we finally got it replaced. But, Scott knows, he's laughing because he knows that this is something common. You're like, well, okay, but I still have to maintain it. So, it is that we have sometimes to do almost magic, to keep these things running, because, there's a long-range planning of it's going to be replaced. But in the meantime, you're also held with a responsibility but you have to maintain it and keep it going for the next 5, 7, 8 years, whatever, it takes in order for you to maintain that. And, and having that information, that piece of information, but also the additional factors that are coming in that does affect it, data alone is not going to be enough. There has to be all these conversations going on, for you to be informed of what's going on, as a director, and especially with all the planning and, assets that are at the end of their life cycle, how is that going to, affect the long range planning? For instance, if we replace a chiller, but that school is going to be replaced within 5 years, but I do have to replace the chiller today, because if not, it's not going to, it's going to be we're going to have to basically pull that campus offline and it's not going to be operational, then how do you integrate that short range planning into the long range planning? Okay, we're going to design a chiller system that's going to be able to be, used in a new school. How does that transition work? There's a lot of factors that come in, and sometimes we're just thrown curveballs that it's like, okay, you feel like you're getting hit from all sides and you're trying to juggle so many things that it's hard to just make decisions just based on data alone.
Great answers. Guys, we got a bunch of questions coming in from the crowd. I know we are just about at time, so I don't want to force people to stay if they don't have time, but let's try to jump into a few of these questions if we can. I'll just try to read them out loud real quick. Arun, I'm going to save your one about AI here to the end. That's probably one that we could talk a whole nother session on. Gaynor Gordon Smith, great question. And Ron, I think this is good, but Scott and Alex, you guys probably have a lot of firsthand experience with this. Data on overspending or cost projects, when an assessment is not done, right? And we just go out and we plan a project, right? I'm kind of thinking this, what is like a real quick tangible ROI? If we have better data on things like what things are going to cost and what they should expect in their life cycles, how does that help limit some of those cost overruns by having that assessment data?
Well, from my perspective, you have sometimes you have more seasoned staff and less seasoned staff. And we're a smaller city, so we tend to lose our best staff to the bigger cities that can pay more, and they poach our staff. So having that data, the short answer would be having that data gives a good starting point of what we can expect when we're forming our budgets, particularly looking back on projects that were completed, as well as those ones that they maybe didn't, that went a little sideways. That's a starting answer for me.
Yeah, in our case, taking out the whole COVID season, that was just crazy, how the market was just going all over the place. But, I think knowing the data and knowing the, having that replacement plan in place helps a lot. Also understanding where the market is, not only regional, but also national, and the shortage that of labor that's going to, that is projected to come within the next 3 years, not because of a lot of probably 50 or 60% of that labor, especially in the, the trades and that knowledgeable and seasoned staff, are scheduled to retire within the next 3 years, 60 or some say even 70% of that. And then the staff that is coming in to replace that, or the people that are coming in to replace that, is not really enough to basically replace that season and technical trades, right? So what that is going to do is basically is going to increase the labor, because companies are going to increase their labor rate because they want to attract people because they want to do work, right? So just understanding how the market is really behaving, I think also helps as far as understanding, and really you're not going to have a set in stone answer for it. Costs could go up, just like crazy with all these things happening, but basically you can do projections. And Scott knows you try to include in there enough contingency to more or less take that hit if your projections are not within that range, just because of outside factors. But it's not really, doing projections in cost is really, you're just doing a guess estimate. You're saying, hey, this is the probable cost today, within 2 or 3 years, this could increase, changing in refrigeration, codes, changing every 3 years, code is changing. So all those things come into play whenever there's, you're projecting costs, and just understanding all of that, may help you have a more clear understanding of how that is going to affect the cost, final cost.
And just real quick, I reread Gaynor's and the other thing is, it takes a little bit of pressure off of staff if you can. I understand what he's saying when you don't have it, because what you're doing your best guess, as Alex is saying, and that best guess is based upon the staff you have working on it, right? We can't manage every single thing. We do our best, but if you can get the facility assessment, at least it gives you a better starting point, a third party that you can point to as far as what that's at. Which the closer, obviously, you get to your estimates, the more credible you are, the more potential you have of building on that credibility and gaining more funding in the future.
Love it. And there are a couple extra questions. Arun, I'm going to reach out to you independently. I've got some thoughts on the degradation and artificial intelligence and the question regarding technology and the existing assets. I'm actually going to send that over to the presenters, and Altaf, sorry if I messed your name up, I will email you separately with an answer, and anybody else that's interested I can email. But guys, thank you all so much. I'm sorry we ran out of time here, but Dan, I'll close it back or turn it back over to you just to close us out.
Thank you, Luke. And thanks again, everyone, for the great information today. We appreciate Brightly Software for sponsoring today's event. If you want to learn more about them, please view the links in the related content module. And a reminder to attendees to receive your CEU certificate. You can download it from the Earn Certification module on your screen. This webcast also will be archived on facilitiesnet.com/webcasts. This concludes today's event. I'm Dan Hounsel, Senior Editor for the Facilities Market with Trade Press Media Group. Thanks to everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.